All right, so before we begin, I would just like to state for the record that today is December 13th, 2022, and my name is Ben Bauman, and I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana, speaking with J. Murray Clark, and we are doing an interview for the Indiana Legislative Oral History Initiative. So just starting off, when and where were you born?
Indianapolis, 1957.
And what were your parents' names?
Jim is my dad's name, and Claire, my mom's name.
When did your family first get to Indiana?
Well, my grandparents were from Indiana, so I was probably unclear on my grandfather's side.
Okay.
But his father, my great-grandfather, was actually a firefighter on the south side of Indianapolis. So that I'm probably fourth or fifth generation with them. My grandparent, my dad's family, my dad was the son of Scottish immigrants.
Okay.
And he was the baby. He was much younger than his oldest brother, Alex Clark, who was mayor of Indianapolis in the 1950s. And they actually immigrated to Canada first and then moved down to Indianapolis. And that would have been roughly maybe the early 20s, somewhere in there.
That's interesting. Okay, cool. And what were your parents' occupations?
Well, my dad's a lawyer.
Okay.
Was a lawyer. He passed away in 2021.
Oh, wow.
For 60 years. And mom was a homemaker and so forth.
Yeah. Do you have any siblings?
3 siblings, 2 brothers. One, Matt, who's a lawyer, retired lawyer, but is a year younger than I am, kind of an Irish twin. And then my brother Cam, who's 5 years younger than I am, who was just recently retired as commissioner at Indiana Department of Natural Resources.
Oh, okay.
Served under 4 different governors. And then the baby is my sister. Her name is Heather Clark Ifford. And she lives in Carmel with her husband.
Oh, okay.
Has 3 adult children.
Yeah. So how would you describe your childhood?
I grew up by Holiday Park here on the kind of the north side of Indianapolis. And it was, kind of a ideal, wonderful way for a family full of, particularly my brothers and I, kids that were always outside getting in trouble and so forth. Lived wooded area behind us. At that time, so we moved there in 1962. And then lived, I grew up there, and, at that time, we were on the absolute outskirts. In fact, I'm not sure that was in the city of Indianapolis at the time, 63rd Street. And then, of course, in 1969, the governments of Indianapolis and Marion County were unified.
Okay.
Thus, the term unigov in Indianapolis. But we were kind of on the outskirts at that time, right?
Yeah.
Which is hard to believe now.
Yeah, okay. That's interesting. Who would you say were the most influential people in your childhood?
Well, my dad always, right? But his brother Alex, who was a remarkable man, he oldest son of Scottish immigrants, first in his family to go to college, was a major in intelligence officer in Patton's Third Army.
Huh.
In his 20s, was a member of the team that negotiated the line of demarcation with Russia.
Wow.
Eastern Europe. Purple Heart, Silver Star, 2 bronze medals, shot twice, captured once. On my mother's side of the family, my grandfather, Frank McKinney, was self-made person, banker, very successful. Never stepped foot in a college classroom, and at one point in time was chairman of the board of trustees at Indiana University, Democrat national chairman under Harry Truman. So I don't know of anybody, I've never met anybody that had better male mentors than I had.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Jeez. What did you know about your family's politics growing up?
Well, I like to tell people I'm a mutt. I mean, my mother's side of the family were Irish Catholic Democrats. My father's side of the family were Scottish Presbyterian Republicans. So,
Yeah.
you know, truly a mutt, right? Me,
Sure.
And took a little bit from both. You know, Republic. Although, you know, there was less polar differences, you know, in the parties
Sure.
at that time. My grandfather was a banker, and he was very conservative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Democrat, very conservative.
Yeah. What schools did you attend growing up?
I went to St. Luke Catholic School on the north side, grade school, Brebeuf, high school there on the north side, and I went to Kenyon College undergraduate. It's a liberal arts school in Ohio, really a fine school. I probably couldn't get in today. And then I went to IU Law School in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
I worked while I was in law school and then started practicing law after I got out of there.
Were you involved in any extracurricular activities in college or anything?
I was a baseball player. I played baseball. You know, that's kind of the main extracurricular activity.
Yeah, that's cool. Did your awareness of politics change in college?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I grew up in a political home.
Yeah.
So, you know, I grew up in a home where healthy political debate, but a healthy respect for people who ran for office, got in the arena, as Teddy Roosevelt said, and considered politics and elected office public service, not, you know, politician in the pejorative way that many people look at it today.
Yeah. So when you were in college, did you feel like you could relate to people about politics? Or was it different because you'd come from a family that had so much political knowledge already?
I mean, I could always communicate, you know, argue my position or whatever. And, you know, as you probably know this, right? Liberal arts schools tend to be havens for young, more radical thought and all that. That wasn't me. I was...
Yeah.
So actually, we did get in a fair amount of debates. I took a lot of social sciences, you know, political science and sociology, macro sociology type of political thought. I was always tended to be the most conservative.
Yeah.
Although at least at that time, there was a welcome for and a tolerance for differences in political opinions. So it was a great school, had a great education.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Let's see. So what was your employment history after college?
Well, I went right into law school, and I went full-time first year, and then second year I worked as a bailiff in the Marion County Circuit Court. So in Indiana, each county has one constitutional court, that's circuit court. In the bigger counties, you have a circuit and superior court. Smaller counties, the smallest counties, you probably only have, I mean, the circuit court will handle everything from speeding tickets to capital murder, you know.
Yeah.
And that was great. I worked there, and then I worked at my dad and uncle's law firm as a clerk, kind of a gopher, my last year in law school. And then worked at that law firm for, almost 20 some years, 23 or 4 years. And then came to Baker and Daniels. This firm was originally the Baker and Daniels in 2005, I think.
Yeah, that's cool. Interesting. And when did you get married?
We got married in 1983. Yeah.
Okay. And do you have any children?
Still married. Yeah, we have 4 children. We have a boy who all live in town here. A boy who works for a company by the name of Cornerstone, which is a real estate company in the healthcare area, kind of a healthcare niche. Mm-hmm. He's married and has 1 little boy, and we have 3 girls. My wife's a pediatric dentist. She went to IU and then IU Dental School and then did residency at Riley Hospital. That's the same route our 2 oldest daughters took. And so the 3 of them practice in one way or another together. And then the youngest, Annie's a senior at dental school, went to IU undergrad and is a senior at IU Dental School.
Oh, that's cool. All right. And so when did you decide to get more seriously involved in politics?
Well, it was a natural progression, right? When I came back, I mean, we have a very close family, and I spent a lot of time with my dad and my uncle, and, you know, even when I was a bailiff in law school, or in circuit court, I was expected to work, you know, election days. So it was kind of a natural progression. And there were a handful of us, you know, in law school that were interested in politics, and we worked for the local Republican Party, which at the time really was the kind of political force in Indianapolis. And, you know, we worked during the day and worked for them at night, and, you know, met people and had a ball, and,
yeah,
you know, the chair people of the party back then, Keith Bulin, who was, this is going to sound pretentious, but it's really, if you read about him, you will hear this said that he at one point was considered like the most powerful county Republican chair in the country. And then his successor, John Sweezy, who was from the south side or east side, there a long time. And so we did a lot of work with them. Got to know county elected officials, city council people. Dr. Bert Servaz, who was the president of the council for 25 plus years, who was a remarkable, I mean, just meeting these remarkable leaders like Dr. Servaz, my uncle, and Senator Lugar, and Mayor Hudnut.
Yeah.
I mean, it was in many ways kind of the heyday of Republican in this city. And there was a way, if you wanted to work hard and you were young and you wanted to roll up your sleeves, like a handful of us did, mostly from law school, many of whom you'd probably recognize their names going forward, right? You could get in there.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so when did you decide to run for the Indiana General Assembly?
Yeah, so I first ran for, I forget what year, but I ran for township government.
Okay.
Township, we called it advisory board at the time. Township government's been largely eliminated or decreased statewide, which is probably a good thing. And was elected, and then I really thought about running for state senate in 1990 on the kind of the north side of Indianapolis, and Les Duvall had been a senator in that area. Les, who was a remarkable leader too, and then Bill Swords had been in the legislature a long time, and then he was current. And he had talked about retiring, but he said he was going to run again, and so actually helped him. He had a really rough primary in May of 1990, very high profile, actually helped him. And then but he had given me the impression he wasn't going to run again. Well, so I started lining up, and then he told me in 94, 93, late 93, he wanted me to help him. And I said, Bill, I'm a candidate, whatever, we'll see what happens. It actually won, defeated Bill, who was, so that's how that shook out. So I was elected in 94.
Yeah. Did you have a particular campaign strategy at all, or?
Well, at the time, that's a good question. At the time, the Republican Party organization was so strong, and in order to win the primary, you really had, this wasn't always the case, but more often than not the case, you had to go through the slating process.
Yeah.
And we could spend an hour on the history of that and all that, but the slating process was essentially a vote of the rank and file political activists. So it's the precinct committeeman, the vice committeeman, and essentially the ward chairman in your district.
Yeah.
And so my strategy, and I started very early on, was to gain the trust and ultimately the support of those people.
Mm-hmm.
And then when that happened, I won the slating. As it turned out, Bill nor the other people that ran the slating decided not to run the primary. That's how strong it was at that time.
Yeah.
Although Bill would have been formidable, no doubt, and we would have had to raise money and run a more traditional campaign. And then at that time, that was a pretty strong Republican district, and so ran a more traditional general campaign. I mean, my thinking at the time, if you remember 1994, right, that was Newt Gingrich's contract with America and so forth, and I was a conservative Republican, more in the mode of less government, kind of personal accountability, economic development and all that, which was kind of my, forte.
Yeah.
My slant, so. Yeah, so I was elected in 94. Of course, we were all elected in 94. That was a good Republican year.
Yeah.
We thought we'd never lose another election until 1996 came around,
So I'm curious to have a couple questions. So what were your thoughts on the direction the party was moving at the time? Because your family honestly has had a political background for a while. I mean, did it seem kind of different at all from what you kind of grew up with, understanding the Republican Party, or?
Well, I mean, so if you're involved in, my dad was in the legislature one term in 1962.
Okay.
And he won in 62, got beat in 64, and of course, like we all won in 94, we all lost in 64, right? I mean, that was the Goldwater year and all, and all that. And but my uncle was a mayor. We were local government centric as our involvement, our day-to-day concerns and so forth. And there was a real practical bent about right? So because running a city or running a state, right, you can have your ideological views, but you got to keep the trains running on time. So
right.
The 94 was with Newt's stuff and all that more, and I like that because I always I like policy, and it fit really well with kind of what I thought.
Yeah.
And I was a Reagan Republican, it fit well with kind of Reagan Republicanism and so forth. So, it all made sense to me. Now, I wasn't naive, given my family history, about the legislature and how it's, you better the sausage factory, as they
Yeah.
say, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you can be an ideologue, but you better know how to learn how to become, or know how to be effective.
Yeah.
Work with others, and so forth, right? Because at the time, the legislature was very close, right? When I was first elected, when I was first running, I think the Senate was 26-24, and the House was like almost even. You know, back then it went kind of flipped from, it seemed like election to election, whether it was Democrat control or Republican control. So Republicans had a good year in '94, and we went up to like 28 Republicans.
Yeah.
Right. So it was a lot closer at that time. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, interesting. And when you first won your election, what did you think of the election process in general? Did it seem like a enjoyable process, or was it complex?
I loved it. But I mean, I grew up with all of it. It was not foreign to me.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, so it was work.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a young family. I mean, it wasn't easy. And I'm trying to practice law at the same time, make a living, right? So, but it was just something, and in our family, and by the way, not all my siblings were in it like I was and all that, but I mean, you were expected to give back in some way or another, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it was not a chore to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just part of what we wanted to do and accomplish and so forth.
Sure. What was your reaction when you found out that you won?
Well, I suppose a little relief. I mean, if I'd have lost that, I mean, because it was a strong Republican district. I mean, it just was.
Yeah. Did you have to develop a different sort of campaign strategy for future elections, or just keep the same stuff?
I don't remember. So I was elected 3 times. I'm not sure I even had Democrat opponents in the other 2.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm not sure I had any opponents in the other 2.
Wow. Okay. So it's a pretty clear path then.
Well, it was a good Republican district.
Yeah.
I had great relationships with the rank and file through my work with the party. I was resolute in keeping those relationships, in part as a political strategy, but also because I really respected the people in our party, either party really, who worked at it day to day, really
Mm-hmm.
cared enough about the system and democracy to.
Yep.
And I was a precinct committeeman for many, many years, and ward chairman too, right? So, anyway.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Okay. What were you thinking when you walked into the State House for your first day in office?
Yeah, so and again, I'm in Indianapolis, born and raised.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
My first job was on Market Street. It happened
Sure.
to be East Market Street, but I mean, I knew that I had defeated somebody who was close to or a friend of a lot of my new colleagues, right? So I had to keep that in mind, because I wanted to be effective.
Yeah.
I wanted to be taken serious and looked at as credible. So there was that, but I mean, I was elected to go there, represent like everybody else, constituents, and I had 1 of 50 votes, right? So
Yeah. Sure. How did you keep track of the needs and wants of your constituents?
Well, there's a lot of different ways, right? So if you get to know people, you see them around, they tell you. We do a survey. We did a survey. It wasn't scientific though, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as you talk to legislators from out of state, I'm sure they tell you that they did what they call third houses. When you're an Indianapolis legislator, there's not the need to do that so much, because you see people. It's not like you're going home on the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't know who their legislator is as much, right, in an urban area.
Sure.
But we did. I mean, I went to school board meetings and I did. We had meetings, kind of community organization meetings and so forth.
Yeah. Okay. Do you remember the first bill that you sponsored or authored?
Yeah. So there was and it may still be there, a kind of a hazing process when you have your first bill, and it was actually it was so naive I didn't realize it was somewhat controversial. It was an immunity bill for, oh gosh, I think for maybe individuals giving emergency medical treatment for somebody who has a heart attack at a ball game or something like that. And at the time, the trial lawyers were there was a trial lawyer who was Senator Hellman, who was head of the Senate Democrats, and he just grilled me.
Okay.
And so what happened was, the hazing process is your own people get up and ask you like innocuous, stupid questions that there's no good answer to,
Yeah.
And then they really, and it was, and I was the first one I was the first freshman ever, right? And then Hellman got up and he just really went after me, But yeah, that was the first one I had.
Okay. How far did that bill get?
I think it passed.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't a huge bill.
Right.
It wasn't incredibly controversial.
Still, to get your first bill passed, that's pretty good. So nice. Sorry. How often would you have to work with the other party to get legislation through?
Well, a lot. I mean, again, it was closer back then. And, so in committees, typically you'd have a majority and the Republicans, maybe one, or, not 4 or 5, maybe 2 or, so I served for many years on the Judiciary Committee. And Senator Rich Bray was the chair for many years, Rod's dad. And Rich put politics aside, and we were dealing largely with nonpartisan issues that meant something to people.
Yeah.
One particular one I was interested in was adoption. We recodified the adoption code while I was there. And so, I mean, if you want a bill passed, you better get Democrat votes because you might lose some Republican votes, because we dealt with, he was really a good chairperson.
Yeah.
And we had other great chairs. Back then, education issues, so where you really needed Democrat support, not wholesale Democrats.
Sure.
Erling Rogers from Gary was a member of the Senate for years, and I think the House before them. And I had and have so much respect for her, and she would come back to my desk and say, "Why'd you vote that way?" I'd say, "Well, here's why." I said, "Why'd you vote the way you did when we voted?"
Yeah.
She'd tell me. And it's amazing how much you learn when you try to understand the life experiences of the people you serve with. By the way, not just across the aisle. I think we've lost some of that, certainly in D.C. But you don't. That's the beauty of. Let me conversely. I think you'll lose some of that with supermajorities or big majorities. But we had to, for the most part, we had to get Democrat support. Now, in the budget, right, those would be more party line votes.
Right.
But remember, a lot of I always served in the majority. The House went back and forth, right? So when you had a Democrat House, if you had a bill, your bill comes out of Senate, you're looking for a House author, more often than not, you have to find a Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
Or you at least had to have some Democrat support or never get a committee hearing.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Well, that's, and so, as you may know, in the legislature, if a bill passes one house, it's alive at conference committee time. And sometimes if you couldn't get the bill heard in the House by a committee or, or you couldn't, whatever, you couldn't find a House sponsor,
Yep.
you at least you had to hope that you had it live at conference committee and you could find some place to give it another shot.
Sure, sure.
Which is not always great because of germaneness rules and all that. We can get into that, but you had to deal with. At that time, you had to get Democrat support. I mean, to take an approach otherwise was not the best practice.
Mm-hmm.
Not the way to really become effective, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. So, did you think, because you served there from the 90s, I guess you left in like 2010 or something? Or,
No, I left
or
in
2000.
We can get into that, but
Yeah.
I left in late 2005.
2005, that's right, okay, yeah. And so, did you see any change between the relationship in Democrats and Republicans over the course of your career in the legislature, or was it the same?
Yeah, I hate to say it was the same, but there was a consistency there because for instance, the president pro tem, was the same during that whole
Mm-hmm.
time. Bob Garton, the finance committee chair was the same. Larry Boers, budget committee chair, Maury Mills,
Yeah.
and then on the House side, you had some like Senator Hellman left. Senator McCarty was very strong. He moved on. He led a state agency under Frank O'Bannon. Probably more turnover in leadership on the Democrat side, but still, you had during that term, you had very strong Democrats like Erlene Rogers and others.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to say it was the same.
Okay.
I think toward the end, the House got more Republican,
Okay.
which does change strategy probably a little bit.
Yeah.
But there was certainly a consistency there.
Okay. Yeah. What would you say were the differences between the House and Senate?
Mm-hmm. Well, at the time, right, I think this is where our Democrat system is set up, really, and that is that the Senate was truly the more deliberative body, right,
Mm-hmm.
and that would drive people in the House nuts. But you have
Yeah.
the House ran every 2 years,
Yep.
like Congress, and then you had the Senate running every 4 years, or in the case of Congress, every 6 years. I think the approach of the Senate generally and Senate leadership was much more measured and and all of that. And the House more impulsive, and all of that, right? So, and I think that's true at the federal level, at least. Used to be.
Yeah. Okay.
And I appreciated that, by the way, because I like I think the legislative process drives people nuts, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's a very legitimate process.
Sure.
Particularly in a state where you have to get up the microphone when you have a bill and you have to justify it and you have to answer questions.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
In front of everybody.
Yeah. It's a logical thing you'd want to have. So. How influential would you say party leadership was to getting legislation passed?
Party leadership?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. So you have there used to be. I mean, again, the political party in Indianapolis and Marion County leadership was so strong. So they used to have a pretty big impact. I think that waned a little bit unless it was an election issue.
Mm-hmm.
You had such strong kind of legislative leaders, I mentioned 3 of them, that, they drove a lot of the policy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like the party kind of drove them. But I mean,
Right.
not that they didn't listen to their party, both sides.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Did you ever go against party leadership?
Party leadership?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure I did, but
Yeah.
I mean, I voted against a couple budgets,
Mm-hmm.
which usually put me in the doghouse, but
How influential would you say lobbyists were in the General Assembly?
I mean, they're always influential. I don't know that that's ever changed.
Mhm.
You know, you had such strong, entrenched leadership in the Senate that you didn't have the tail wagging the dog.
Okay.
Let's put it that way. But I mean, they're strong, right? They're advocates. Some are paid, some are not. Some
Yeah.
are nonprofits, and everybody's got a lobbyist, an advocate. They just don't
Sure.
know. Right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you learn who the ones are that are credible and
Yeah.
you can trust, and you kind of go from there.
Do you think they had influence on politicians and like how they voted at all, or
Sure.
okay? What about like gerrymandering? Do you think that was influential?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the process of redistricting
Yeah.
happens here every 10 years, and the way it's done in Indiana, I think, is fair, right?
Mhm.
So you have one person from the Senate, one person from the House, and one person from the governor's office, right? So the victor goes the spoils.
Yeah.
And so in the 91 redistricting, it was 2-1 Democrat, and then 2001 it was 2-1 Democrat, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, the House, the Republicans in the House always got mad at the Senate because their Senate districts looked pretty good. The House they thought didn't look good, and then congressional seats not so much.
Yeah.
But I don't, gerrymandering's is a big word. I was never involved
Mhm.
directly in the redistricting.
Yeah.
I mean, redistricting
Sure.
was important.
Yeah.
Because there is, I mean, but beauty's in the eye of the beholder.
Sure.
And when 2 of the 3 are Democrat, as was the
Yeah.
case, and
Yeah.
but you know what? That's why you elect governors.
Yeah. Let's see. So, is there anything that you would change about the legislative process based on your experiences?
I'd pay him more.
Okay. Yeah.
I think elected officials generally are underpaid,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in today's environment. I think the fact the mayor here makes, and the governor makes less than some of his agency leaders, I mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a way, frankly, to attract the best.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, again, I love the process. I think it's legitimate.
Yeah.
And I know people who are not. It's easy to look at the process from the outside, particularly if you're not knowledgeable about it, and criticize it.
Sure.
But I mean, it's not easy to pass a bill.
Yeah.
And
true.
it's not easy to pass a bill that means something. I mean,
Yeah.
I dealt with a couple, mutual holding. It took me 3 years to pass it. 3 sessions, excuse me, not 3 years. And, it ought to be hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I knew what I was doing.
Yeah. Yep.
So, I mean, I think the process is very legitimate. Oh, there's some small things, maybe. I can't think of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Were there any controversial legislative issues that were debated when you served? Or?
Oh, most, and I'm sure you hear this from people you interview, most of the bills are not controversial and or not partisan.
Okay.
The vast majority
Yeah.
of bills. The budget typically was controversial, right? I mean, in the budget years, and you know that in Indiana, our legislature only met in budget sessions until, I don't know, probably was part of early 70s.
Yeah, 70s, yeah.
And that, with the kind of bills that, you couldn't run for re-election as a governor until Otis Bowen in the 70s and so forth. So a lot of those changes for me. The first bill the first substantive bill, vote I ever cast was very controversial.
Okay.
Which
What was that?
Well, there was a recount in Lake County of a Senate district. And Frank Mervan, who's still there, and whose son, did he win? He won.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. And so Frank was an incumbent, and he ran in 94 up there, and 94 was a bad year from Democrats, and it was basically a tie, and he ran against one by the name of Sandra Dempsey. And I think she had been a local official there. And they went through the whole recount process and courts and everything, and the way the system works is that the final vote goes to the body.
Yeah.
And so they tried it in front of the Senate.
Yeah.
And all the Republicans voted for Sandy Dempsey, and all the Democrats voted for Frank Mervan, and she won. And Frank beat her 4 years later.
Yeah.
And actually, Frank and I became pretty. That's one of those. You're thinking my first vote, and it's kind of a.
Yeah.
I mean, there were, anything having to do with kind of abortion was controversial.
Sure. Yeah.
Trying to think what else. A lot of the controversy was in bills was more parochial. Like you'd have an issue on coal mining or something. It'd be very controversial for what. And now the pari-mutuel passed a year before I got there. But anything having to do with gaming was controversial. Alcohol at the time was very controversial. But I never really felt. I mean, I always, from my dad, my family, they always said, no bill's going to ever be as good as the proponents say, nor as bad as the opponents. And Western civilization will go on no matter how you vote. You had to make a judgment. Go with it, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, there are people and still are people who just agonize over votes. And
Yeah.
I've seen some people have strokes, and
Yeah.
I mean, hey man, it's okay.
Yeah. Calm down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeez. Now I saw that you had worked on some stuff in newspapers with small business legislation, insurance legislation, and you mentioned earlier about the childhood adoptions. Can you talk a little bit about those and what you tried to do?
Yeah. So the adoption stuff. I was really interested in my mom was very big supporter when I was growing up, helping place kids, and I felt like I'm a cradle Catholic, and it helps me form my position on abortion, but I felt like you can't just be a naysayer, right? You got to look at and our adoption code was antiquated, I felt like, and through no fault of anybody. Adoption is an area, at least back then, where it was a subject of a lot of litigation.
Yeah.
It got to the appellate courts and stuff, and so some of the people I grew up, I played Little League baseball with at Orchard Little League up by 63rd Street, where I grew up, had become really good adoption lawyers, and I've known them through the years, and had gotten involved in litigation, and we got together and worked together to, come up with some ideas, and really with leadership from people like Teresa Lubbers, who was involved in that discussion, and and Rich Bray, who was chairman. And we would have long policy discussions in judiciary about different issues in adoption, and again, not partisan, and there were differences of opinion. And so I was proud of what we did.
Yeah.
And on the insurance side, the mutual holding bill, I was on either the banking committee and the insurance committee. For the most part, when I was at the Senate, were combined. They weren't always. My family has a banking background. I'm not an insurance expert. My interest in the mutual holding bill on insurance was the AUL, One America Now. AUL at the time was having a difficult time as a mutual insurance company, raising capital and growing. And it was due to what they said, and I, for the most part, concurred, antiquated law in this area. Indiana was way behind on banking laws, which is why we lost our banks, right?
Yeah.
And I was fearful, and one of those banks, AFNB, was my family's bank. And I didn't want to see the same thing happen to AUL, which of course is a fixture in downtown, the city I love, and so forth. And they had announced that if we didn't modify mutual holding bill, they're going to redomesticate in another state. And I didn't want to see that happen. I thought it was bad. So that's how that came about. And Governor O'Bannon had said he was for the modification, but he couldn't get it through the House.
Okay.
Which was Democrat at the time. And that actually ended up in a special session, which put me in the real doghouse with the leadership of the Senate. But it was important, I thought, enough for me to stick my neck out in my city and all that. That was my interest there, yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the interesting aspects when you're representing a district, that sometimes you have to just kind of put it all on the line for that city you represent or those towns.
Yeah, and that's you can't do it all the time, or you'll lose your effectiveness.
Yeah.
And but most legislators have to come to grips with that decision at some point. And there comes a time when you have to say, I know you're all going to be mad at me, but
yeah,
because there's not one member of Senate when I was there who was a constituent, right? I mean, you're there to represent your constituents, right?
Yeah, that's the job. And so, why did you end up leaving the General Assembly?
Yeah, so I shared Mitch Daniels' first gubernatorial campaign in 2004. He asked me in late 2005 to become chairperson of the Republican Party, a state party, a position I'd never considered or sought or anything. At the time, I had a couple years before I had made some noise about running for President Pro Tem, and ultimately I didn't. And Bob Garton was reelected, and Bob had an exemplary, if not historic, tenure as President Pro Tem. I just not very good at taking orders from anybody. It's a problem I've had since kindergarten.
Okay.
No, but anyway, and then when he decided he was going to run for re-election, because it wasn't, he'd been there a long time, it wasn't clear he was going to run for re-election. When he decided he was going to run for re-election in 2006, and Mitch wanted me to, the governor wanted me to take that position, I thought it was probably good, and because I really wanted to see Mitch get reelected governor. And at the time, his approval rating statewide was like 30-something, because people in the hinterlands didn't like daylight savings time. They didn't like the toll road lease up in northern Indiana. And then, ironically, of course, Bob Garton got upset in a primary by Senator Greg Walker. So that led to David Long becoming Senator Pro Tem. And maybe I wouldn't have been able to. Maybe he would have gotten elected anyways. I mean, but that was kind of brought a chuckle to a lot of people. But that's why I left.
Okay. So how would you summarize your time overall then as a state legislator?
Well, I loved the legislature. I loved being a legislator. And people ask me, not as much as they used to, because it's been a while, do you miss it? And the answer I give is, yeah, I really do miss it. I love the legislative process. As a practicing lawyer with a young family, it was becoming more and more difficult to be as good a legislator as I wanted to be in the interim period, right?
Yeah.
When we weren't in session. And that's a huge part of it, right? Not just what you do when you're in session, but how you help people when you're not in session. And but I loved the legislature. I particularly loved, the conference committee time, really, if you're familiar with the legislative process. It's all exhibition season until the conference committee. And I filed a lot of bills over the years. Because I was here, and as a lawyer, there is a little bit of an advantage in the process to being a lawyer. I think it's just interpreting law and even drafting comes a little easier. I mean, it's not dispositive, but so I love the process. I love the building. I love the people. I met so many interesting people there, almost to a man or woman there for absolutely the right reasons. Learned a lot about the state. I didn't always butted heads at times with even people in my own leadership, but utmost respect for them.
Yeah.
And the job they did for this state. Great leaders.
Yeah. Do you have a proudest moment as legislator?
That's a good question. I don't know that I do. I mean, I'm not sure I afforded myself the ability to be proud. I mean, I thought a lot of it was what you ought to be doing, making a difference and all that. I mean, some of those bills you mentioned were proud moments, I guess, when we passed it.
Did you have any regrets at all, or anything that you wish you did, or?
I suppose my only regrets would be not getting to know the life experiences of more of the people in the building, not just the legislators. And I tried to, I just think you just grow and all of that if you take the time to do that. And it was hard for me. A lot of the socialization that went on at the time, maybe this is probably still the case, occurred at night, right? I mean, and everybody's down there, people are staying.
Right.
And that's how you got to know people, really. And I couldn't do much of that because I'd go to the law office. I remember I was on Market Street. Right. Kind of at night, or I would, we had a young family. I don't regret practicing law or being with my family, but I probably didn't maximize my socialization opportunities.
Well, based on your experiences, what advice would you give to future legislators or current legislators?
Well, that part I would tell them that need to get to know people. You need to understand. I'm sure a lot of them do that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
But I mean, the more you learn about the life experiences of the people around you, particularly those who are the other party or across the aisle, or the more effective you'll be.
Yeah.
And the better you grow as a person too.
Sure.
We live in a world of social media and people living in bubbles,
Yeah.
and that's just not good, right? It's not productive. It's not real,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah, I mean that'd be my biggest thing, I think.
Yeah. Makes sense.
I would commend anybody that's taking the time to run for office and put themselves out, particularly in today's world,
Yeah. Yeah.
where you can't walk across the street without somebody writing about it or talking
Sure.
about it.
Yeah. How do you think politics has changed in Indiana?
Well, I think politics has changed. Obviously, when for years you couldn't. I mean, obviously it's become more Republican, more
Mm-hmm.
conservative. I mean, for years it was kind of thought you couldn't become governor if you didn't have a vote in Southern Indiana. Well, that's not the case anymore, really. I mean, the growth and the political power is now kind of in Central Indiana. You look at the growth of the surrounding counties here. Like
Yeah.
it's amazing. Like Carmel and Fisher are the 5th and 6th biggest state. Hamilton County is now the 4th biggest county, heading toward 3. So obviously that's changed the whole, political environment. But then generally, right? I mean, this whole thing with just like nationally, social media and people living in the bubble and
Yeah.
not taking time to, not everybody, but realize we all have a lot more in common than we do
Yeah.
differences, right? And there's a lack of civility, although, and I don't spend much time over there at State House. I mean, I don't know that that's the case in our legislature.
But I guess this is kind of like a vibe you get, perhaps.
Well,
potentially.
your question was how's it changed in
Yeah.
Indiana? Well, I mean, it's
Yeah.
definitely a vibe, generally,
Yeah.
politically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not the Hoosier way anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't vilify or demonize somebody just because they disagree with us, and that's what you see more and more of,
Mm-hmm.
it seems to me, thanks to social media in large part, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see, last couple questions then. What do you think is the most important work of the Indiana General Assembly?
Well, I think there are certain things that for the only constitutional responsibility of the legislature is to come up with a budget, so that would be the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, funding and establishing policy on the big things that really matter to Hoosiers: state police, National Guard, healthcare, Medicaid, public health, education. Public education is 50 to 60% of the budget, and setting policy on it. Those are the big things, right? Education, budget, state police, National Guard, utilities. Those are the big things that the legislature, I think, deals with, and I deal with a lot of other things, but
Sure.
that's what the things that matter to Hoosiers on a day-to-day basis, irrespective of political, tax environment, taxes.
Yeah. Makes sense. Let's see, last question then. What do you want the people of Indiana to know about their influence on the Indiana General Assembly?
Yeah, well, despite what I hear people say, right? I mean, for the most part, people over there would prefer not to make decisions that ending end up in them getting beat in the next election.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's not always, sometimes you gotta make a hard decision, maybe you think is the right decision, but politically probably isn't a great one.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the reality is they have a tremendous impact. Now, people who are on the minority side of an opinion, when I say minority, given the current makeup of the legislature, who come in droves to the State House and say nobody's listening. I mean, I just think legislators will listen. They do listen. Many of them have come from prior, local government,
Right.
county, like, they're, again, their interest is not to get defeated in the next election. So, but, again, to the bubble point, right, there are people on, as Rex earlier says, mighty thin pancake doesn't have two sides.
Yeah.
And so, I believe that they do. As if nothing else, then as a practical matter, they listen to constituents.
Right. Yeah. Well, is there anything that I didn't ask about that you wanted to
No.
mention about your experiences?
No, I mean, I was lieutenant governor candidate in 2000 while I was in the legislature, and that I was able to do that because my term, you're staggered in the Senate, and my election year was in the midterm, so I didn't run the same year as the president. And Indiana's different because we're one of 10 or 11 states where the governor runs the same year as the president. Most of the other states are during the midterm. So yeah, that was great. That was a great experience. I ran with David McIntosh. You run like the federal system here, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And we lost in a squeaker by 340,000 votes. So, but I was in the legislature then.
Yeah.
It was fun going around the state, and you'd have Republican legislators show up at rallies and stuff. You kind of remember that, right? Who your friends are when they show up.
That's right. Figure out quickly.
Because we were never the favorite in that race.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, good luck to you, man.